The 2024 fantasy football season is barely over, but already I'm starting to look at 2025 and wonder, what will the top 3 rounds of drafts look like? Well, in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how I'd rank things if I was drafted today. I'm Tom Strachan. I've written hundreds of articles for FantasyPros.com, and the fantasy football season, it never ends for me, so let's get into it. Zay Flowers at 312, the 36th player on my list. I could have put a lot of players in this final spot, but I'm going to give Zay the nod, bumping his ADP by 9 spots from where it was in 2024. Wide receiver 13 in total yards, 12th highest target share among wide receivers, 10th in yards after contact per reception, 12th in design plays rate. Flowers, he gives more consistency than top-tier spike weeks, but it still feels like there's room for his growth in fantasy football because he's only scored 9 touchdowns across the last 2 seasons combined. He is my wide receiver 17, and a lot of those stats that I talked about, he's outdone those, so I feel okay about Flowers there. But if you don't agree with Zay Flowers, let me know in the comments when you've seen the rest of my top 36. 311, wide receiver 16, Marvin Harrison Jr. Sure, it has been a disappointing season for Harrison compared to the likes of Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors, and it was particularly grim if you took Harrison as a fringe round 1 wide receiver last year. But there were only 11 wide receivers with more touchdowns than Marvin Harrison's 7. His yards per reception were very similar to Brian Thomas Jr., and he did all that on the 10th highest average depth for target among wide receivers who had 50 or more targets. He ranked 37th in receiving yards, and that is bleak, no way about it. Most of it stems from his catch rate, which wasn't great. He ranked 103rd among wide receivers with 50 plus targets in catch rate at 52%. The biggest barrier, it's the relationship between him and Kyler Murray and the types of routes he was running. If that can change up a little bit heading into next year, then I think that he can truly bounce back. Isiah Pacheco coming in at 310, our first running back of this video, RB15. Pacheco really struggled coming back with a broken fibula this year. That's an injury that we've seen players struggle from. You saw Tony Pollard when he came back from it. Mark Andrews, he's taken a lot of time to ramp back up. Kareem Hunt hasn't been the answer for the Chiefs, and with a healthy offseason, I'd expect Pacheco to retake the workhorse role. I'd have Pacheco higher, but he wasn't overly effective pre-injury as well. 34 rushing yards for 135 yards. There's a small part of me that's worried about that and the scheme that the Chiefs are running. We'll get to the 309 in just a second, but first, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. We cover all aspects of fantasy football around here. We've got big plans for rookie season and the run up to the draft. RB14 coming in at 309. It is Bucky Irving, a rookie running back. Hadn't run for 1,000 yards and averaged over 5.5 yards per carry in 17 years. Bucky Irving's currently at 1,033 yards and 5.49 yards per carry. That stat comes from my good friend, the Dynasty Grill. Bucky, he's been completely emphatic this year. 4th highest explosive run rate, 3rd best missed tackles forced rate, and the 3rd highest yards per carry after contact rate. Like, Bucky is just been excellent at every level. Maybe this regresses if Liam Cohen moves on, the offensive coordinator in Tampa, but Bucky, he looks like the real deal, and he can get there in both the receiving game and the ground game. Unmistakably the type of ceiling player that we want on our fantasy teams, and I won't be surprised if maybe I'm a little bit low on him here. QB2 on this list, it is Josh Allen. Maybe someone sneaks into the top 36, but I'm not sure if we do see it. So far, I've just got 2 quarterbacks. Josh Allen could very well be the MVP, and his weekly ceiling, it's easily behind any quarterbacks. He put up scores of 41 and 51 points in weeks 14 and 15 this year. Absolutely carried you through those early playoff rounds. The only negative that brings him down slightly, it's the stat padding QB sneaks that saw him get 12 rushing touchdowns this year. Admittedly, that's a slight regression from 2023 when he had 15, but if he ever drops below 10, that is a noticeable difference in fantasy points, and it's not something he's been making up for in the passing game this year. So don't get me wrong, Josh Allen is truly elite in every way, but the Buffalo scheme, it can just be a bit irritating sometimes, and I don't really believe they've got a top-tier wide receiver or tight end who's going to carry his passing game at times. 307, Jonathan Taylor. A few weeks ago, I probably would have had Jonathan Taylor lower than this because the Colts' offense, it just looked so inept. His efficiency didn't look great. He was posting a career low in success rate as well as career low in receptions per game. Then Jonathan Taylor went on an absolute tear to end the season. He had 4 games in a row over 95 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns. That should have been 6. We all know about that one that he dropped. Overall, though, I have a lot of concerns about Anthony Richardson and the Colts' offense ability to keep drives moving. Anthony Richardson hasn't developed in a way we'd like to see, and if the drives keep failing, then it's hard for Jonathan Taylor to get enough touches to pay off significantly. I wouldn't be surprised, though, if recency bias from this playoff run does carry him a little bit higher than I've got him. 306, it is T. Higgins. For the purposes of this, I'm assuming that T. Higgins has gone elsewhere. The Bengals, they can afford to pay him, and it wouldn't be insane to do so. After all, look at the Eagles with A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, Jalen Hurts. But the Eagles, you know what they do? They draft well, they coach well, and they pay players early. So they're not having to pay as high a price as the Bengals are going to have to do. We all know how cheap the Bengals ownership are. Can they really actually find the cold hard cash to give Ja'Marr Chase close to $40 million a year, as well as $30 million for Higgins, at the same time as paying Burrow that top of the market contract? Like, if Higgins landed with, say, somebody like Jaden Daniels, I'd move him up higher. Imagine T. Higgins landed in Buffalo with Josh Allen. Like, geez, I'd move both of them up substantially. But he could also land in Carolina or New England with lesser talents who we've not really seen it from yet. And what I'm not worried about, though, it's the injuries. I shoot for ceiling all day when it comes to fantasy. And since week 5, T. Higgins has averaged 19.2 PPR points. That's wide receiver 6 since that point. The only argument that I'll hear against T. Higgins is that he should be ranked higher. 305, Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Spoiler alert, JSN is my only Seahawk player in the top 36. DK Metcalf had only 3 games with double-digit points since week 4. That's not what we want. This season, Metcalf has finished as wide receiver 24 or worse on 11 occasions, while JSN has 9 finishes inside the top 24. Since week 7, JSN averages a 27% average target share, 8.6 targets per game. This offense, it's moved to feature him more heavily in another year in Ryan Grob's offense. JSN could get even better, particularly if Seattle can get some competent offensive line play. George Pickens, 304, wide receiver 13. Injury really curtailed what had been a promising season for Pickens with 5 games over 15 points in a run-heavy offense under Arthur Smith. Russell Wilson's connection with Pickens, it's absolutely real. All Pickens' best games have come after Russ took over as the QB1. It looks like Russell Wilson's going to be back next year. Russ missed a large part of training camp in 2024 due to his calf injury. And if Russ can stay healthy, then that connection can get even better this offseason. Next year, it could be even more fruitful. If the Steelers bring in another wide receiver, I don't think that's going to be a worry for George Pickens because he's a big play machine, unless it's somebody like T. Higgins who's really going to hog volume. James Cook for Buffalo Bills. Cook, he had a league-high 15 rushing touchdowns this year, despite the fact that Josh Allen is vulturing plenty near the goal line. Cook also averaged the 7th highest yards per carry at 4.98, the 7th highest missed tackles forced, and was in the top 20 in explosive run rate. The Bills, they could look to integrate Ray Davis slightly more, and Ty Johnson's passing game role doesn't look like it'll be going anywhere. But James Cook has established himself highly enough to be a top 30 pick in 2025 with no hesitation. 302, Garrett Wilson. I've got him down with the Jets, but it seems likely that we're entering a world where either Garrett Wilson isn't with the Jets or Aaron Rodgers isn't with the Jets next year. The rumors have been persisting since the deadline that Wilson was open to moving on in search of a team that wins games. And the way Rodgers has ignored him over the last few months, it's been entirely predictable, but it seems to have really upset Garrett Wilson as well. Garrett Wilson, for what it's worth, saw similar stats to the rest of his career, slight uptick in touchdowns, but ultimately he still hasn't established himself with the elite tier of wide receivers ahead of him. Bad coaching, bad quarterback play, all 3 years he's been in the NFL. If he stays with the Jets and they start over at QB again, with a new head coach and offense again, can you really trust him any higher than this? I'm not too sure. 301, Kyren Williams. For what it's worth, I am a big Kyren Williams fan. He does what the team want him to do, and that goes a long way with Sean McVay, who places a lot of trust in him. Williams saw his yards per carry drop from 5.0 in 2023 to 4.1 this year. He also regressed in success rate and regressed in his receiving role, but he did score more touchdowns with 14 rushing touchdowns to 12 last year and also stayed healthier than in 2023 also. Big knock coming against him will be an expected leap in involvement from Blake Corum, who will have more familiarity with the system at that point. And if he can gain the trust in the pass protection role, that could really eat into Kyren Williams' work. We'll move on to round 2 in just a second, but do let me know in the comments if you've got a player you think deserves to be higher or lower. 212, Lamar Jackson, QB1. Look, like you can see the Ravens jerseys behind me. You can see the Ravens patch on my chest. Lamar is always going to be ranked highly for me, and he deserves to be. Like, Lamar scored 25 points more than Josh Allen this year, thrown for 11 more touchdowns, passed for 200 more yards, not to mention the fact that he still hit 850 rushing yards. Jackson had 13 games over 20 points this year, truly taking the next step as a passer with Todd Monken as his OC. He may not get as many rushing touchdowns as Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts, who do the cheek sneaks for tush pushes or whatever at the goal line, but he makes up for it in efficiency. Flowers in year 3, Bateman finally starting to click, Andrews and Likely both excellent outlets. This is a no-brainer for me. Trey McBride at 211, the tight end 2, gets set for another year of hearing about how Trey McBride is absolutely set for positive touchdown regression. It is incredible that McBride has been able to be as excellent as he has been with only 1 receiving touchdowns. If the touchdowns do start to flow, he'll contend for tight end 1 overall in future years. He was 11th in receiving yards among all wide receivers and tight ends, 3rd in receptions league-wide, and trailed only Jamar Chase and Brock Bowers. 210, Christian McCaffrey, RB10. Perhaps this one's a little too pessimistic, but CMC badly burned people in 2024. He'll be 29 years old in 2025, playing on a 49ers team that could be set for a bit of a soft rebuild, particularly on offense. CMC set career lows in success rate, had his lowest yards per game and yards per attempt since 2020. Kyle Shanahan never seems too worried about giving CMC a massive workload. So maybe if CMC is healthy, we get back to 20 touches a game. But I think we saw enough from Jordan Mason and Isaac Guerrero to think that the Niners should involve other backs to try and prolong McCaffrey's career, particularly if they try to make a run into the playoffs next year. 209, Tyreek Hill, another player who was drafted highly this year, and the Miami Dolphins passing game was a complete disappointment. Tua checking down at his highest rate in the last 3 years, as well as having his lowest touchdown rate in that period. The whole offense just revolved around Jonnu Smith and Devin Achane, rather than the 2 elite wide receivers they have in Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. In 2023, Hill had 10 games over 85 receiving yards. This year, he had only 2 over that number. Hill finished as a top 10 wide receiver just twice this year, and even removing the games that Tua didn't play, Hill finished outside the top 30 on 7 occasions. The only question here is if this soon-to-be 31-year-old wide receiver deserves to be any lower. RB9, Breece Hall comes in at 208. Last offseason, Breece Hall vowed he would get to 1,000 rushing yards for the first time in his career. Instead, he put up 175 fewer rushing yards this year than the 994 he managed in 2023. He also averaged a career-low 4.2 yards per carry, which is still respectable, but it's not where we really want for the superstar running backs. Hall, he saw more targets per game with Zach Wilson at quarterback than he did Aaron Rodgers. Maybe a QB change reignites Breece's fortunes, but I don't think anyone wants to take him in the first round right now. 207, Derrick Henry, the RB8, the big dog. He continues to defy time, but sooner or later, Father Time claims everyone. That will be the main worry for Henry, who turns 31 this week. Henry has enjoyed the benefit of defenses being scared of Lamar Jackson. It's helped him have a career high in success rate, also run for a career high 5.8 yards per carry, his biggest rushing total since 2020 when he was 26 years old, right at his peak. Henry gets there through volume and touchdowns. He's seen over 250 touches in all 5 of his last healthy season, scored double-digit touchdowns in the last 7. It's hard to see that changing, but I think people will feel better about the younger options around him. 206, Drake London, wide receiver 10. It was a good season for London despite Kirk Cousins massively regressing halfway through the year and taking the passing game completely down with him. London, he ranks 9th in receptions among wide receivers, so the 6th most targets, set career highs in yardage, targets, receptions, touchdowns, and fantasy points. And the ceiling could be higher still if Michael Penix settles in okay. 205, Josh Jacobs. I've never really been in on Josh Jacobs at the right time, and this year was no exception. I find it a little difficult to project his ADP going forward because you could make an argument that he belongs in round 1. After all, he's only 26 years old, right at his peak, outscored Jordan Love 17.8 points to 17.3 points per game this year. But the fantasy community, they just don't love Josh Jacobs as a player despite all this. He scored 20 points in 8 of his last 10 games. But would it be a surprise if the offseason ends up featuring a decent amount of Marshawn Lloyd hype? You know, Marshawn Lloyd came into the NFL with a good bit of belief in him. It didn't work out because of various injuries and issues, but there's plenty of reason to believe he could have a bigger role next year. I tend to think that this is about where Josh Jacobs settles. We're halfway through things. If you made it this far, do me a solid. Hit that like button down below. AJ Brown, 204, Philadelphia Eagles. It is undeniable that AJ Brown is a first-round talent, but I'm not sure how easy it is to make the argument that AJ Brown is in a situation where he warrants being a first-round pick right now. Brown has played 13 games this year and had 7 games below 14 PPR points. Last year, Brown played every game and had only 4 games below that mark. Obviously, Saquon is making a massive difference. Combined with Jalen Hurts looking less assured as a passer this year, we've got some awesome wide receivers coming up, and I just can't argue for A.J. Brown ahead of them currently. 203, Joe Mixon, Houston Texans. There's a lot that could change for the Texans in 2025 for a start. It's possible they could move on from Bobby Slowick. Maybe they could have healthy wide receivers, and maybe CJ Stroud could actually look like a good quarterback once again. If even some of those things happen, then maybe Joe Mixon doesn't hit his ceiling again. But I'm still okay with Joe Mixon. He had 7 top 8 weekly finishes this year, went over 90 total yards in the same amount, all while setting a career low in success rate and averaging a similar yards per carry to his time in Cincinnati. The big difference was volume with 21 touches per game compared to 18 in 2023. That might not sound a lot, but it is a big difference over the course of 17 games. Mixon, he'll be 29 when the season starts, but we just fell for that trap with like Barkley and Derrick Henry thinking that older running backs shouldn't be players we're taking. I wouldn't touch Mixon in the first round. This is a similar area to where Saquon Barkley and Jonathan Taylor were drafted last year, and I'd be comfortable taking Mixon here. 202, RB5, Chase Brown. Unless the Bengals bring in another running back, there's no reason that Chase Brown should be any lower than this. From week 9 through to the end of the season, when Zach Moss was on IR, Brown was the RB5 with a higher yards per carry than Josh Jacob, higher yards per reception than Bijan Robinson. Brown, he had only 1 game outside the top 10 running backs in the spell, and if he can find the end zone and get some more touchdowns more often in the ground game, then his ceiling could be even higher. Last player in round 2, 201, Brian Thomas Jr. Maybe I'm too low on BTJ here. He went on an absolute tear to the end of the season. Now, part of that could be the fact that Christian Kirk, Gabe Davis, Evan Ingram were all missing time. The running game wasn't particularly effective. Brian Thomas is just really damn good as well. He finished 4th in total receiving yards despite ranking 17th in targets. My only hesitation is the turnover in Jacksonville. It could be quite severe this offseason with a lot of people from GM to the coaching staff on the hot seat. But if I can be overweight on Brian Thomas in 2025, I'll be very happy. 12 players left to go. This is where the biggest names are. Keep watching to find out who you could be looking at in round 1 this year. Brock Bowers was everything he was supposed to be in his rookie season, and that's why I've got him here at the 112 and the tight end 1 overall. He set the record for rookie receptions in a season, breaking Puka Nakua's 2023 record, broke Mike Ditka's rookie receiving yards for a tight end record, did all this with up and down quarterback play for the Raiders. If they can sort that out this offseason, Bowers could be worth a top 5 pick in 2026. 111, Jahmyr Gibbs. Last year, Gibbs was drafted in a similar range, and it's hard to push him any kind of lower or any higher at the minute. I mean, David Montgomery will still be around. He does have a new contract, though. Yes, Monty's going to be coming off the MCL injury, but the Lions hope he can be back for playoff games. So it seems fair to assume that he'll be healthy enough to play well from the start of the 2025 season. Gibbs has got weak winning ceiling. Regardless of whether Montgomery's around, he's worth drafting at this price. Wide receiver 7, Malik Neighbors coming in at 110. We talked about Brock Bowers breaking Puka Nakua's record. Well, Malik Neighbors can also break that record in week 18. He's only 4 receptions behind Brock Bowers for what would be the new all-time record. Neighbors had awful quarterback play this year, but still led the league in targets per game at 11.3, ranked 6th among wide receivers in yards. Just a straight-out baller at every stop. The Giants simply have to solve their quarterback position this offseason and build their offense around Malik Neighbors going forwards. 109, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Maybe I end up being a bit wrong on this one. I don't feel entirely certain. As the variety in the Lions offense, it's left St. Brown less consistent this year than he was in 2023. He did make up for a decrease in volume and yardage by setting a career high in touchdowns at 13, though. And the Lions, they're just such a fun team. I don't think St. Brown should fall much further than this, particularly in full PPR, but I also don't think I could take him any higher. 108, Devin Achane, RB3 for me. We always knew Achane's yards per carry would regress from the ridiculous 7.8 he had in his rookie season and 4.1 this year. It's a bit better than it felt like he produced for most of the season because the Dolphins' running game, it was simply awful. Achane, though, he made up for it with 4.9 receptions per game, the most receiving yards and receptions among running backs. If the Dolphins are a more functional offense in 2024, then Achane will be an absolute smash at this cost. 107 CD Lamb. I could see a world where the sentiment is lower on Lamb after a difficult year, but he was so good in the back of half of 2023. I just find it hard to give up on him. Lamb averaged 17.6 PPR points this year, even when he was dealing with Cooper Rush at quarterback. He lacked consistency because of the offense just faltering. This is a guy who's put up over 1,300 yards in the last 2 seasons. He had over 9 touchdowns in both those seasons, and I expect Lamb to get back to those kind of numbers in 2025. Wide receiver 4, Nico Collins coming in at 106. What more does Nico Collins need to do to be just thought of in the same elite tier as the top end wide receivers? Collins has been excellent ever since CJ Stroud stepped into the league, but the factors around him probably keep his ADP subdued to this point. Stroud regressed heavily in 2024, and the offense under Bobby Slowick, it continues to have some annoying run-heavy tendencies on first downs or in situations where we don't need to run the ball. There's nothing that seems broken long-term about Stroud and this offense, but they've got work to do. And while Collins has been incredible at every point, would he have done so if Stephon Diggs stayed healthy? I really like Nico, but he was wide receiver 20 in points per game from week 9 to 17, and that's what kind of just keeps him at the 106 and can't elevate him higher than this. Bijan Robinson comes in at the 105, my RB2, and I truly believe you can make an argument for Bijan in the top 3, but I think public sentiment might keep Robinson in this range until the summer, when historically RBs get pushed higher up drafts. From week 9 onwards, Bijan was the RB2 with 21.3 PPR points per game, ranked fourth in rushing yards per game, had the second most rushing touchdowns, led the league in success rate on man and gap scheme success rate. From weeks 1 to 9, Bijan averaged 19 touches per game. Down the stretch, they fed him even more with 23.1. Seemed to finally realize what they had for him. 2025 could be a massive year for Bijan. 104, Puka Nacua. Maybe this is getting a bit bold at this point, but hear me out. Cooper Kupp looked cooked down the stretch, and the rumors around the trade deadline seemed real. If Kupp moves on, the pathway becomes so clear for Puka Nacua. From when Nacua returned in week 9, he led the league in team target share rate at 31.9%, ranked first in targets per route run, ranked 5th in targets per game with 10.1, and 5th in fantasy points per game. Okay, we're going to get to the last 3. If you made it this far, I know you've enjoyed this video, so hook me up and hit that subscribe button. We do Dynasty, Redraft, DFS, and Best Ball all year with guest appearances from some of the biggest names in the fantasy football industry. Justin Jefferson, perhaps if the Vikings decide to keep Sam Darnold as starter, Jefferson goes a spot higher than this, but I think that uncertainty and the unknown factor of JJ McCarthy might keep Justin Jefferson lower, maybe even lower than this. Like, Jefferson had his lowest amount of receptions per game, lowest yards per game since his rookie year, but he did equal his most touchdowns per year and trailed only Jamar Chase in receiving yards per game. 102, Saquon Barkley, the RB1. I wasn't in on Barkley in 2024, and he absolutely shoved it down my neck every single week. I was concerned his explosivity was starting to wane, and the lack of pass catching, as well as getting vultured on the goal line touches, could harm his outlook. Well, Barkley had his lowest receptions and receiving yards per game of his career, scored only 4 touchdowns inside the 5-yard line. That's less than Roschon Johnson for reference. But it didn't matter whatsoever as Barkley put up over 2,000 all-purpose yards. Hats off to Saquon Barkley. He was incredible this year, and I wouldn't be surprised if for a lot of people, he is the 101. My 101, of course, it is Jamar Chase. The only reason I don't put Barkley 101 is the fact he'll be 28 years old in a few weeks' time. Historically, that's an age when running backs start to drop off. Now, I know Derrick Henry, CMC, Alvin Kamara continue to prove us wrong on age curve stuff, but it's enough for me to ding him slightly. Not to mention that Jamar Chase has just been unreal this year. Heading into week 18, Chase leads all wide receivers in targets, receptions, has over 130 more receiving yards than anyone else, leads the position with 16 touchdowns. Chase, he's just been unreal on every level, and maybe it's slightly buoyed by the Bengals' pass defense being just terrible, forcing Burrow to throw so much, but that likely isn't changing anytime soon. They've got a huge amount of work to do on that defense. And the other big factor, if T. Higgins leaves, Chase's volume could be even bigger. That's my way too early top 36 ADP for 2025. Let me know in the comments where you see players going. Stay tuned to the channel because 2025 rookie content is coming your way very, very soon.